My name is Mary Conquest. I'm your host for Safety Labs, the podcast where we explore the human side of safety to support safety professionals. We move past regulations and reportables to talk about the core skills of safety leadership: empathy, influence, trust, rapport. In other words, the soft skills that help you do the hard stuff. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Hi there. Welcome to a special edition of Safety Labs, our 100th episode. Yay! To mark this milestone, we've compiled highlights from the podcast so far, featuring a selection of strong opinions and memorable moments from our wonderful guests. Over the previous 99 shows, we aimed to provide a balanced, open-minded platform to explore the full range of themes, debates, and challenges impacting the safety profession. However, certain subjects inevitably featured heavily in the conversation and generated more lively discussions on LinkedIn. So, expect lots of firmly held views on hot topics, including safety theories and metrics, blame, frank assessments of the role of EHS professionals, psychological safety, Heinrich, and emphatic statements on safety porn, zero harm, and safety culture. If you're looking for a relaxing listen, maybe save this episode for later. A huge thank you to all the guests who have featured on Safety Labs and shared their candid views on workplace safety. An even bigger thanks to the Safety Labs team that produces, writes, edits, and manages the show. We also appreciate every listener, viewer, and social media commenter. Enjoy this special combination, and here's to the next 100 episodes. Sam Goodman, Human and Organizational Performance Consultant.
Safety professionals, green safety professionals, when you find yourself into this world of the professional practice of occupational safety and health, you often find yourself immersed into a world of organizational beliefs, of rules, procedures, and they're all a little different from organization to organization. And especially when you're new and you find yourself in your first organization, you kind of start with this idea of like, this has to be right. Like, there's people here that have been doing this for 30, 40 years. Like, who am I to question any of these? Who am I? I've been doing this for a month. Like, I can't question these things. Surely they know exactly what they're doing. That's not always true, right? So I think this idea of being willing to kind of let go of that fear and stepping forward and be like, I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. I don't know that that's necessarily the best way. Do we really want to? When you're green, you have a really hard time doing that. That would be the piece of advice that I would give to new green safety Sam, would be that. Is like, don't be shy. Don't be afraid to step out and challenge. Don't be afraid to dissent. If it looks like bullshit, it smells like bullshit, it's probably bullshit. Say that it's bullshit. That's okay. And what I've found is, especially as I went through my career and kind of grew in my career, what I found is that the more that you do that, you start to realize that, wait a second, like, they actually value that. Most organizations, good organizations, value dissent. They value those things. They want to hear a dissenting opinion.
Fred Sherratt, founder at Straight Talk Safety. One of your assertions is that safety is a social construct. So can you explain what that means to you?
Sure. So safety isn't actually a tangible thing for a start. It's not really a thing in any given way. And I agree, that's a fairly pedantic semiotic approach to it. But what safety is it's what we make it collectively. So different groups have a different understanding of safety. That's the easiest way of kind of explaining that. Safety is what you make it. It's kind of what are the accepted, what can you do and what can't you do in terms of rules, boundaries, acceptable behaviors, norms, things like that. And those change depending on who you're talking to and which situation you're in. So when we talk about a safety culture on a job site, frankly, that's fairly nonsense, because there isn't a homogeneous culture. Everybody is doing it in different ways as they interact with different people in terms of safety. So safety is something we create and recreate as humans all the time.
Safety Fix It is really about the safety professional being the easy button or the kind of counterweight for incompetent leadership in the organization. It's that, right? And we see that play out a lot of times in organizations where it's like our leaders are not really good at dealing with people. They're really screwing things up. Let's not focus on that. Let's throw a safety professional on the other side of the scale to balance that out. So when they're out there, kind of running people into the ground, we'll send out the safety professionals to say, look, there's no such thing as time pressure. that's part of that kind of safety fix-it mentality. It really comes back to the easy button thing, is it that organizations are looking at that going, we're going to hire someone to manage safety for us. And we all know how that kind of works out. It ends up with crap safety management systems, crap safety programs, and it ends up with a burnout safety professional that you're going to go through at least one or two a year almost. At that point, you're just going to cycle people out. And that could be down to something as simple as, hey, there's a trip hazard out there. You need to go do something about that. Hey, there was an event. You're the punching bag now. Hey, there's this. Hey, there's that. If there's anything that's could even remotely be tied into being safety related, it automatically goes to the practitioner to manage, to take care of, to own, to run to ground. The one that sticks out to me is I was at a site years back early on in my profession, and they're like, hey, listen, we need more chairs in the lunchroom. That's a safety thing. You need to figure out how to order more chairs and get more chairs in the lunchroom. It's that, right? That's safety fix it.
David Provan, CEO at ForgeWorks.
In the past, I think organizations were so politically sensitive to the moral pursuit around safety that if you were someone who questioned any safety practice in the business, you were automatically seen as someone who didn't care enough about safety. So if you put your hand up and said, I don't want to be audited next week because these audits don't add any value, then you were like a recalcitrant leader in the organization. Or I think these incident investigations are a waste of time. We keep coming up with rubbish actions. And organizations were hypersensitive to any critical feedback on their safety management regime. And that really stagnated and limited all of our progress. Like, I think we've had 2 decades of stagnation inside industry because of our inability to have open, safe conversations about, is anything we're doing in safety adding the value that we intend it to add? And if not, having the ambition, the audacity to make some wholesale changes. And now we're just starting now to see organizations making some very big changes in the way they approach safety. And I'm kind of excited by that. We really need to be far more centered in what's happening today and proactive about what's happening in the future. And the challenge that we face as a profession is that most safety professional activity is reactive or it's planned and scripted. So the things we do is responding to incidents or non-conformances or regulator or customer requests, or it's a planned meeting, a planned audit, a planned inspection, or some other planned activity. When I talk with safety professionals, I say, look, to be really effective in your role, or to be effective or to do the best role you can, is you should have 50% of your week on Monday completely unallocated. So look at your count and completely unallocated for white space. And that's the space that you need to spend roaming your organization, connecting with people, understanding what's going on in real time, investigating weak signals and other sort of things that are happening, getting involved in work planning activities and real-time decision-making and things like that. And when I talk to safety professionals around that, mostly they just say, that's just a pipe dream. I'm 40 hours a week, wall-to-wall meetings all week, every week. And so I guess when we talk about the future of the profession aligned with that role purpose, I've come up with a whole bunch of activities that safety people should do to do those things that to be focused on those things that I've just mentioned. But it has to start with having more space. And that means stopping doing a whole bunch of things that safety people are currently doing on the safety work, safety clutter side of their role.
Tim Diath, Head of Safety and Wellbeing at Yarra Valley Water.
I was a frustrated safety professional. I still am sometimes, but it's really about these traditional approaches to safety that so many safety managers or safety professionals are clinging to. So these paternalistic approaches that really reinforce this parent-child relationship between the safety team and the workforce. And those sort of approaches really undermine a lot of the great work that's happening in safety circles, with progressive safety leaders who are really trying to understand the people more so than trying to impose safety processes or procedures on the workforce with little or no consultation. So when I was frustrated, or when I become frustrated, I often go back to this question that I used to ask myself to bring me out of this mode. which is stop trying to look scientific and get on with the job of understanding your people. I feel like so many organisations, when it comes to safety, are so preoccupied with these endless reports on safety metrics and measuring the lag indicators that don't really tell us a lot. They forget to identify, with their people and really recognise that the people hold the solutions. We hire experts to do expert work, and we shouldn't be developing safety programs on behalf of them and then trying to implement them in the field without their involvement. It just doesn't work, and it really undermines what I think the safety profession is about, which is engaging with people, helping them identify solutions, and then being a conduit between them and senior management.
Brye Sargent, CEO at The Safety Geek.
So many times the management teams look to safety managers to hold everybody accountable for safety. But safety managers have no authority over the employees. Zero. And when I say authority, I mean we can administer consequences. I've written employees up before, but because it's me writing them up, it doesn't mean anything because I cannot fire that employee. That is the ultimate accountability. And when a safety manager does not have that ability to fire the employee, you cannot administer consequences that are meaningful. It's just going to be a joke. It's going to be a piece of paper in their HR file that maybe one day they'll use against them, but it doesn't have any meaning to it. Now, I have been in the situation where I've been a safety manager with higher fire authority, and I had zero issues getting my safety policies followed because I had authority. But that's not the case in most places. In most places, the person that has authority over the employees are the frontline supervisors or the department managers. So those are the ones that actually have to implement safety policies and procedures so that way they can have that accountability with those employees. So the safety manager going out there and sharing the company policies and procedures and training on how to correctly do something, they're going to listen to it, right? They're going to gather some information from it. But what they actually do when they get on the floor and they're doing the job is whatever the supervisor tells them to do. So if you flip the coin over and you change it to where all the training, all the coaching, all the observations are done by that frontline supervisor, guess what? You have now just built this culture because now the person that they listen to most is telling them to do it the right way. And of course, they're going to follow it the right way. So unfortunately, this is not how things are set up at most organizations because they look at it as the supervisor does not have time to do that. Why did we hire a safety person if you're just going to have the frontline supervisor do all the safety stuff? So that is the gap that we need to close.
Tony Muschara, author of Risk-Based Thinking.
Part of the safety professional's duty is to help the line managers understand that that safety is not the safety professional's responsibility. He or she is a facilitator to help the line manager understand what needs to happen when critical or safety critical activities are being performed or functions are in various operations are in progress. Too often I've sat in planning meetings where the line manager said, okay, let's start with our safety moment. We're going to start with a safety moment. And someone speaks for about 2, maybe 3 minutes about safety. And then everybody can breathe a sigh of relief. We've accomplished our safety objective. Yep, we've checked that off. Now we can talk about production. And that mindset is antithetical to safety. Safety happens exactly the same time production happens. I always talk about work. Work is a use of force to create value, and so if you're creating value, you're producing something, you're manufacturing something, some operations occurring. That means that there's a hazard in play. If there's a hazard in play to create work, which is force over distance. In other words, something changes. Then you better be thinking about safety at the same time you're doing production. So I see the safety professionals, one of the safety professionals' primary duties to the organization is to educate and train the line managers, but not to take on the role or the responsibility for safety. That's not their purview. It's important for managers to maintain that responsibility.
Scott Gesinger, experienced safety professional.
Complacency among safety professionals is a huge problem. And like any big problem, it's complex and it's got a lot that goes into it. But a lot of it goes back to that original idea of 88% of the accidents that happen at work are the fault of the employee, because that really got drilled into us generation after generation after generation. I think another part of the problem is that for a long time in safety, we had a large portion of the safety professional population was not adequately educated on how to be a safety professional. So you had people who were drafted into safety or worked somewhere else and sort of ended up in safety, and they didn't get the educational background to really say, this is a science, here's the art and science of safety, here's how to understand it. Some of those people did wonderfully. So I don't want anybody out there to think I'm knocking them. I just think that over time we've become more educated, we've become a little more adept at looking things from a scientific standpoint. Now, along with that, you had a lot of consultants and vendors and suppliers who were catering to behavior-based safety and making a pretty good living off of behavior-based safety. You had a safety professional who had either been educated that it's the employee's problem, it's the employee's fault, or who hadn't been educated. And then somebody comes in and they say, hey, we've got this great safety program. It'll solve all your problems. It's XYZ. Then it takes hold and you invest your time and your resources into it. And it's hard to disinvest from that over time. And so I think that's where quite a bit of it came from. And it was, I'm glad you described it as a shot across the bow, because I do feel like, I felt like when I wrote the book, and I feel like now to this day, that in safety, a lot of us devalue ourselves because we're not illustrating to employers that safety is a hard science. We're doing things like putting up a mirror that says, this is the person who's responsible for your safety. Just an awful message to send employees. So we're telling them, hey, you're on your own. We might own everything. We might make all the rules and give you all the stuff to use, but you're on your own.
Leslie Rex Stockel, Associate Professor of Professional Practice at Oklahoma State University.
Right now, it's sort of in vogue to kind of dismiss Heinrich and say he was wrong. If you read his text, he was saying that the pyramid is descriptional, not causative. And what he was trying to convey was that, and you got to remember at the time, companies weren't doing anything if it wasn't a fatality. If it was anything less than a fatality, they just kind of were like, oh, well, nice working with you. See you later, because this is before modern day workers' comp, right? So what he was trying to do was to convince people that, hey, you need to be paying attention to not just the fatalities. You need to be paying attention to these lower level events because you're having a lot more of them. And if you can be serious about these, then, eventually, theoretically, the fatalities should decrease. Now, we know statistically that it's not quite happening like that today, but I think there are some things that we have to consider as to why that might be true. I think that the way in which we manage workers' comp cases and OSHA recording in order to keep it out of the system, that is part of the reason for this gap between injuries and fatalities, because you can't hide a fatality.
You had a social media post recently criticizing the way some safety professionals use social media. Specifically, it was sharing videos of near misses or even horrific accidents. So what's your beef with that practice?
So my beef with that is, and so we refer to it, and I say there's a small group of us of kind of LinkedIn rebels that don't kind of get into that groove of those things. And we refer to it as safety porn. And it kind of is. It's occupational murder porn. Like, I've seen videos on LinkedIn of people dying, like actually getting killed on LinkedIn, and it's rampant. Or if they're not dead, it's the kind of stuff you watch and you go, like, they probably wish that they were, like, just bad, gnarly stuff. Now, The problem is first and foremost, like, that's the worst day that person has ever had. And now we're sharing it throughout the internet to where that person that is now dead, you want their family to stumble across a video of them dying at work. That seems like a really horrible thing to do, memorializing the worst day of their life. But beyond that, so often we share these things and we use it as an opportunity to point at that person and say, look at that stupid person that killed themselves. Look at that person. If they were more situationally aware, if they cared more about their safety, they wouldn't have got killed at work. That's horrible. That's even worse, right? And so we start with a video that we have zero understanding of. And then we armchair quarterback it and say, shoulda, woulda, coulda, should have cared more, should have tried harder, should have followed the rules harder. And we use that as an opportunity to have this massive comment section. And again, I'll use it as LinkedIn because you can go find these on LinkedIn all day long and point at it and say, my workers would never do that. Oh, I'm going to take this and I'm going to share it with my workforce and use it as an example to say, see that person, you should care more than they did so you don't die at work. That's just dumb. It's just dumb. It doesn't really do anything. It's shock and awe. And I've never shocked and awed my workforces into not getting hurt. You just can't.
Stephen Harvey, founder at Hopscotch Safety.
So I have my own little safety boy sort of Instagram page where I just capture some of those sort of, when people post those sort of crazy videos online or stuff. Like, I've heard people saying they call it like safety porn, but I actually use it in a sort of different way. I know people don't like the judgmental comments that come after this stuff. But what I found in the past, and I've not been able to do it as much in my current role, but in the past, when I was sitting in toolbox talks, people would get these safety alerts and go, all right, cool. Can you tell me what's happening on Safety Boy? And we'd go through some of my sort of stories, and we'd go through some of the videos, and we'd just have a talk about it, like particularly like trenches and sort of people working around it, like excavations or people working at heights, or maybe some of these falls that were happening around, and we could like have a nice, sensible conversation. And if I did hear judgment, I could call it out because I was obviously I'm driving the conversation. So if people go, "Oh, he was an idiot," well, I go, "No, hang a minute. How could that happen with us? Can it happen with us?" And then they would probably go, "Well, no, it can't because we use this or we've got these controls in place. That would never happen here." So it just changes the conversation.
Todd Loushine, associate professor at the University of Wisconsin.
I was preparing for this by going onto LinkedIn and reading, and it's almost like taking poison a little at a time. You kind of become resistant to it. But it's just interesting how so many people have to cut other people down in order to, in an effort to say, well, no, it's this way, or I have a different viewpoint. Or the people who feel that in order to feel like I'm right and I'm righteous, I have to put other people down. And it's too common in this profession right now. And it obviously it upsets me, but I'm not going to try to get too emotional about it. And I try not to engage in the sort of the pettiness of it. I'm really disheartened by the level of discourse we're seeing on LinkedIn. And she's, and I think the immediate response is with people who are like-minded is to say, get into your own little echo chamber and it's bad, whatever. But I try to then to search out, what is their background? What are they talking about? And the problem is what I see is somebody will come in with like a dissenting idea, but in a proper way, a civil way, and they will smash them down. And I know I've gotten in earlier in my career, I got into a few of those, fights too. And my students would then say, "Oh, that person said some really bad things about you." I'm like, so what? You let that stuff roll off. But the idea is that this yelling thing, and through my career, I've dealt with different people who they think they're communicating, but it's communication with a definite form of intimidation. And that's not communication. You're forcing your ideas, thoughts, opinions on me. I have nothing to, I don't feel comfortable, saying anything back, but just to say, I agree. And in the safety field, that's dangerous. We shouldn't be yelling. And, but I understand why people do it. And so what we have to do is we have to, acknowledge the anger, acknowledge the emotion. Yes, sure. But what are we really trying to accomplish here? We need to understand, from the worker's perspective, what happened. I need to understand from the student's perspective, why didn't things go as well? If yelling is how you approach it, you'll never get there, ever.
Gary Namie, director and co-founder at the Workplace Bullying Institute.
OHS, are you listening to me, you safety professionals? It's time to come out of the closet, elevate your status within your organizations, and make known that you have what they need. You want to put out the headline of toxic work environment and getting branded as such in your organization, we can help you. You want to show the C-suite how it's preventable, ask for a seat at the table. HR's been asking for decades. They don't deserve it. You deserve it because you actually have something relevant, and you can bring the science of the psychosocial safety climate research to bear and apply it in your organizations. You hold the key to snuffing out this toxic work environment so that company doesn't end up in a lawsuit with me as an expert complaining about their toxic work environment. And so I think it's really critical that they rediscover or recommit to a new status. When I used to go into organizations, I never met with the safety people. Why would I? Because it was all about preventing broken legs and taking care of physical hazards and trip hazards and MSDS fact sheets and all that other stuff. But no. Now it's in the human realm. Don't you agree, Mary? I think I see an opportunity, but also I see a necessity because HR and legal are never going to fix this. Never.
Tim Marsh, Managing Director at Anker and Marsh.
Organizations were very wary of talking about the link between mental health and accidents. You know, it was considered that any discussion of that seemed to be blaming the victim as opposed to analysing it as a risk factor. Slowly, through understanding the data more clearly, we've realised that actually it's just a huge risk factor, whether you're coming at it from a continuity point of view, resilience point of view, or an individual thriving and doing well perspective. So that the data here in the UK is that for every worker we kill, 31 workers will take their own lives. And when you realise that for every person who takes their own life successfully, something like 25 will try on a given day. And we know about Heinrich's triangle, so you don't have to extrapolate very far to realise you're talking about a lot of people in work, operating heavy machinery, taking really difficult and important decisions, interacting with a whole bunch of colleagues who are really not in a very good place at all. Clearly that's not ideal. The likelihood of them giving you above the line or discretionary effort is bound to be smaller on average than a person having an average day. And we argue the likelihood of them having an accident is higher. It's not about blaming the individual at all. It's about understanding that if 1 in 5 on any given day is struggling with their mental health, that is a colossal risk factor. And you can either hope for the best or you can proactively address it. Know that it's there. We know from world-class safety culture that what you don't do is cross your fingers. What you do is you proactively go out and you understand where it is, why it's happening, who it's happening to, and what we can do about it. And I just absolutely refute any suggestion that those same principles don't apply to well-being and mental health as they do to safety itself.
Stephanie Benay, Associate Vice President, EHSW.
It is not unusual for a woman who has worked in the field to have been harassed sexually, emotionally, physically to this day. Yeah, and I remember sharing this story. I was a young safety professional, and I don't know how many men worry about when you're on a camp job answering the knock at the door at 8:00. I did, because on more than one occasion, I made the mistake of thinking it was a colleague asking a question, and I was, the door was pushed open and I was pushed up against the wall, and that's really an awful experience that you wouldn't wish on anybody, but it happens. And so personal safety in Canada, we started the Women in Occupational Health and Safety Association in 2017, and we had our inaugural event the following year. And I was shocked to hear that discussion with the young professionals, the young female professionals at the table, was still around personal safety and the latest and greatest gadgets that could be used to keep your door firmly shut. when you were in hotels and on camp jobs. And that's, why would you want to, expose yourself to that? Yet at the same time, you're struggling with the balance between, how do I get that field experience that will add value to my career progression? It's an interesting challenge, and it's incredibly unfortunate. And yes, the bullying and harassment and the, whistleblower lines and many organizations are working, but for the most part, if you think that 90% of the businesses are small businesses, they don't have that infrastructure. And the whistleblowing, if a young professional would go to their boss, they would be looking for a new job the next day. They'll get rid of the safety person in a heartbeat. So it still happens, and it's still the discussion 25 years later. It's mind-boggling to me. Yeah, and it's crazy, and but we have to talk about it. And more importantly, we have to ask, and I really want this to be important. My male colleagues and are phenomenal. They're phenomenal. But what we actually need are our brothers in safety to speak up and to hold their gender accountable for their bad behavior.
David Daniels, founder at ID2 Solutions. Safety is for everyone. What do you mean by that? And how has safety maybe not traditionally been for everyone?
The data suggests that if you look into at least the American workplace, you'll find that women and people of color get injured at rates much higher than their white male counterparts across all industries. It doesn't matter what industry it is. And often that is because the system itself was not really designed with them in mind. And when I say things like that, sometimes people will come across to say, oh, am I accusing people of being biased or racist or any of that type of thing, or homophobic or sexist? I'm not accusing individuals of anything. What I am suggesting is that these systems were built many, many, many years ago. And in the United States, they were built without certain people in the room or in mind when the system was built. Having this culture of openness and inclusivity in everything that we do that says so OSHA requires us to have a policy on this, but what that policy looks like for us should be the product of all of our input. Now, again, I'm not naive enough to believe that every single person will be able to contribute, but every interest group, and we should give everyone the opportunity to say, that part doesn't work for me. And if it doesn't, let's make the adjustment, because ultimately the goal is to cause them or help them feel safe. That's what it's about. So yeah, it's going to be different. It's going to be different. And I say this so often, I heard someone else say it and I continue to repeat it. Different does not mean deficient. It simply means different. And when we're having conversations about diversity and equity and inclusion, I find those sometimes almost exhausting because they're slogans. Because as soon as someone sees it different, we, all heads of the room turn to that person and, well, how could you think that? Well, because I do. I don't need a reason to think that way. I just do. I don't feel safe. Well, why not? What's wrong with you? There's nothing wrong with me. If there's wrong, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the system either, but it just doesn't cause me to feel safe when it goes that way. That's all. Let's not make this something that it's not. Let's not make it accusatory. That's not the point. The question is, does the person exposed to that environment feel safe or not? And if they don't, what is it going to take to get them there?
Crista Vesel, adjunct professor for the University of Alabama.
Safety does not mean the same thing to you as it does to me in this moment, next week, in this environment, in that environment. We need to activate it again. So the best thing you can do is to ask people, hey, how could we be safe today? How can we empower and make safety dynamic and actually do something with it? What does that mean today in this work, right? Safety culture doesn't mean anything. It's just culture. Culture has all sorts of things involved in it that we could map out forever. And there are things that we could say, yeah, that's part of safety. But depending who you ask, it may or may not be in that area. So we don't really like the idea of safety culture just because it simplifies something that is much more complex. And by simplifying it, we're taking away a lot of the power.
Dr. Tristan Casey, Director at New View Safety.
There's a lot of criticism to say we should do away with this term called safety culture because it's too confusing. It takes away attention from the broader issues in the organization and really narrowly defines things. But I would argue that, implicitly, we're always evaluating our cultures. We're always looking at it from a point of view. And if we make that safety part tangible and define it and discuss it and say to each other, well, this is what I think safety means to me, that at least surfaces that bias and allows us to move forward with a common understanding of what safety and culture mean together. It's sort of a little play on words. We're still talking about the broader organizational culture, but we're saying, how do these things, these artifacts, these beliefs, these manifestations shape the way safety is practiced? So it's still that broad approach, but we're just focusing on how does this affect the safety, performance, or management techniques in the organization.
James Junkin, CEO at Mariner Gulf Consulting and Services.
It's easy to say safety culture, which I despise that term. By the way, there's no safety culture. If you want to bring on another guest, and I'll debate them that there is no such thing as a safety culture. There's only a culture within your organization, right? And this is kind of part of that. So I'm gonna go on a little bit of rant, and I'm gonna come back to your question. You cool with that?
All right.
All right.
But yeah.
Safety culture, when you say that, it's like it sits over here by itself. And then you have an accounting culture, and then you have an operations culture, and then you got an office culture, and then you got some other culture for the dudes in the warehouse. It's your company's culture. And the sooner we understand that, the better it is, because safety and your overall company culture are the same thing. So if we start, you got to correct the language, right? If we say safety culture, we're implying that it's something that's separate and apart from our other culture. It's just the culture of your organization.
Bob Edwards, Human and Organizational Performance Consultant at The Hop Coach.
Sometimes hire in the organizations where they unfortunately don't get to see enough of the sort of the context of work. Unfortunately, we do this to ourselves. We were provided like higher levels of like metrics, KPIs, dashboards, scorecards, but no real context behind all that. So sometimes when people hear this, it can be uncomfortable for them. They're like, well, wait a minute, our numbers are really good. Well, yeah, so are a lot of companies who have fatalities. So the numbers being really good don't mean anything to me. It's the context behind those metrics. And I think we got to get much, much better at being sort of open and transparent with the context. What does it really take to get that done? Best production day ever. Yeah, we almost blew a unit up. Nobody knows that because nobody's talking about it. But the metrics said best day ever. So it can be hard to hear, but I can also tell you this. Once people sort of grasp this, then they're not satisfied with simple answers anymore.
Kim Bancroft, Director at New View Safety. Tell us about the sacred cows, the assumptions and beliefs in safety management that you would like the safety industry to re-examine.
Every organization would have different ones, and I think my versions of safety sacred cows are things like I call it the metric sacred cow, which is this idea that there's only very few metrics that brilliantly tell us the state of safety in our organization. So for most organizations, it's LTIFR and TRIFR, which are king in the boardroom. And we make this core assumption that these metrics are telling us about how safe our organization is, which has been proven by many researchers in published empirical science-based journal articles that in actual fact, those metrics aren't telling us about the state of safety. They're telling us about our injury performance and how much lost time we've lost, but it's not actually telling us anything about how effective our critical controls are and how critical risk is being managed, and so on and so forth. So I like to really challenge that one, and I've done that in many boardrooms. And what I do is I take the research to them to say, there's actually research is showing that there's actually an inverse relationship between companies who have zero harm as a statistical outcome and their fatalities.
Stephen Scott, Human and Organizational Performance Consultant at Hop Improvement.
We found ourselves trying to figure out any way we possibly could to avoid classifying something as a recordable or a lost workday. case management was the term everybody used, because that number got so much scrutiny. It was part of our performance objectives. It was, published all over the place, and anybody that wanted to know anything about that plant, that was one of the things that they saw. So, while we felt like we were doing all the right things to try to manage safety, what we found was we were actively discouraging people from telling us about safety events until we had an event that was too big to hide, a lost workday case or a recordable where someone actually needed medical treatment. So, it really, over time, we really started to see that we were actively discouraging people from telling us stuff that might have allowed us to learn and improve and put better controls in place to prevent the next bad thing from happening. But that's kind of the trap we got caught up in with this drive for zero. It was really clear that zero was good and anything else was bad. And so zero was the bar that we used to determine success or failure, good or bad, reward or punishment. And when that's the case, people just quit telling you things. It's almost a human nature.
Clive Lloyd, author of Next Generation Safety Leadership.
Unfortunately, BBS lent itself to a lot of those sort of rules. If you follow the rules, you get rewarded. If you don't, well, you get punished. And so all we learned to do as human beings is we'll just avoid the punishment. We just don't talk about it. We just won't admit a mistake. Or when we did sort of move away from the policy, we just don't let management know that. So it's really fixing nothing. It's also the unfortunate consequences. Don't get me wrong, well-intended. I don't mean to attack people who run behavior-based safety things, as I believe most companies that brought BBS in did so with a good intent. I really believe that. But look at the unintended consequences, right? Still to this day, what we'll do is when our people have been good, and listen to the language here, right? You can't get away from this. When people have been good, done the right thing, okay, reward that. And what does this look like in safety, right? We've been that magical 1 million hours LTI free. See that on LinkedIn every day, right? There's those self-congratulatory posts. We've got 1 million hours LTI free. What do we do? Well, reward, maybe a cash bonus for that. And what does that literally do? It incentivizes non-reporting. It's an unintended consequence. Plus, think about it, Mary, when we talk about behavior-based safety, whose behavior are we talking about? It's not the board's behavior. It's not the SLT's behavior. It's the workforce behavior. You cannot hold that position effectively without coming to the conclusion that why do we have incidents? Because of them, because of the workforce. And again, think culturally. What we're doing is blaming the workforce.
Greg Smith, partner and workplace safety lawyer at Jackson McDonald.
We seem to have created this really black hat rhetoric in safety. And that is that every time somebody dies at work, it's because of this evil, recalcitrant employer who does not care about their workforce. I think that's terribly unproductive, and I think it's terribly unfair. I understand where it comes from, but I don't think that makes it right. And often the safety industry buys into this in a way which I think is somewhat hypocritical. So, and it's very hard because we're talking about such a huge spread of ideas and people, but you get this situation where we can't blame the workers because it's not their fault and everything they do is an expression of the organisation. Worker behaviour is not the problem, it's an expression of the problem. Okay, fine. Organisation suffers a fatality, it's the manager's fault or it's the CEO's fault. And we don't recognise that everything that they're doing is as much an expression of the environment that they operate in as anything else. And I find it hypocritical that so many people will jump onto online social media platforms if a company officer is prosecuted, celebrating that event as though it's good for safety. And it's not. It's just, I think it misunderstands a lot.
Elisa Lynch, HSC Senior Manager at Hovione.
In practice, I suppose I see traditional safety showing up as safety officers marching around with clipboards, pissing people off. And I say that because I've been that person. Who's your man that parted the waters? Like literally walking through a site and people are just fucking scattering as you're coming because they don't want to talk to you. So yeah, that would be, that's my view of it. That's how I would describe it, versus when I take a more, I suppose, new view collaborative approach. It's you're walking through site and people are happy to see you coming and they're like, hey, how's things? And you can have a conversation and have a chat, and people come to you with problems, versus I would have found in my experience of a traditional approach, people would hide things.
Right.
So very much under-reporting, cover-up of things, all that kind of jazz.
Logan Martin, HSC consultant, LF Martin LLC.
There are so many theories out there right now of how safety professionals should be implementing, how they should be applying their craft. What is the theory that you go by? What is the theory that I go by? And really what we should be focusing on, which is something in between the theory and the actual application of the work. Okay. So when you said, where do we need to get to from where we are? I think we need to go backwards a little bit. I'm going to get a lot of crap for that, but I think safety professionals have gone into this realm of just like talking this stuff to death, like your LinkedIn page, and having this conversation. And what we really have gotten away from is actually being with the workers and helping them figure out what their ultimate goal is, which is to go home safe every day. Right. So I don't like any of that conversation about safety 1, safety 2, safety differently, HOP. I've always said, and I say this a lot on my own podcast, it just depends. Okay. And it just depends right down to your specific company that you're working with, or your specific work group that you're working with. And all of those theories can apply at once.
Josh Bryant, General Manager of People, Risk, and Sustainability at Mitchell Services Limited.
It was always around what did the person do wrong? How can we fix the person? It was always like, how can we almost like bulletproof the procedure? Let's put another line in. Let's pull all the people in. So if we had an incident involving one person, let's pull 120 workers in and almost like retrain them. What about the 119 who did nothing wrong and didn't really understand what happened with the event? So my personal view was always, yep, something's happened, try and understand it, but it's, it's got to be the person's just done something wrong. I sort of changed my view when I stumbled across safety differently. It was almost like a switch overnight. Like that's how big an impact it had on me. I was like, have I really been doing this wrong? So, that framework of safety differently was about people are a solution to harness and not a problem to control. And I'm just like, you know what, maybe I've been going about this the wrong way and just trying to change people and not really understand their situations and trying to improve this. And I've been involved in numerous behavioral based programs, and I've always got the fact that you are trying to make improvements to the work and the environment, but the comms always came around to, well, the person was in the line of fire and the person was doing this wrong and the person need to fix this, and the things we need to focus on this month is slips, trips and falls and hazard management. It wasn't actually changing anything in our business. So that's where safety differently also had an impact for me to go, I've actually got an ethical responsibility here for people who work for me to make their workplaces better and to actually understand what they're going through day to day, what's their constraints, and actually what do I need to do to put in place to make things go well. So that was a big shift, and then sort of fell into the HOP space and the HOP language, so human and organizational performance. The language of HOP really resonated with us as a business, and that's where we started to make changes as leaders as well. The simple thing with the HOP principles is like, errors normal, even the best make mistakes. People make mistakes, and taking that view every time that we have an incident or something minor happen, and even my CEO now, Andrew, will go, mate, if you and I were on that rig, would we have done exactly the same thing? It's like, yeah, we probably would have. So it's just like that acceptance in the business, and that blame fixes nothing. That's been one of our business principles for a long time.
Nipin Anand, author of Are We Learning from Accidents?
Every society has found a way to project its failures onto a person or a group of people. It's impossible not to do that. If we didn't do that, the society will fall apart. The whole idea of scapegoating is to find meaning, as you started off with in misfortune, is to not look inwards, but to look outwards. To look outwards for our failures. And the bigger the loss, the more the propensity to blame, the more the propensity to find a scapegoat. And it is one of the most powerful rituals that keeps a society intact. And how interesting that an industry, which is, well, maybe about not more than 60, 70, 80 years old, comes up with a slogan that blame fixes nothing. Or you can learn, or you can blame, but you can never do both. What you're telling me is that you're denying the very basic human tendency. So we are denying that energy by saying that blame fixes nothing, or you can learn, or you can blame, you can never do both. Here's the interesting thing, Mary. Every organization blames and learns. We project the problem onto one person, but then we close the doors and we try to figure out what went wrong, and we make those things, put those things in order, and then we create the change. So we are doing both. We're not doing learning or blaming. We're actually doing both, coexisting, because we understand we cannot avoid either. But the thing is that we do it in balance, and we do it one in a covert way, and the other one we do it openly.
Lori Guasta, partner and strategic advisor at ERM.
It comes back to that shiny object syndrome, is what's hot right now. Like today in safety, we're very much chasing, the HOP lens, human and organizational performance, energy-based safety, even new standards that are being created. None of that is new, none of it. And I feel very strongly that the way forward is getting back to basics and just doing safety well. The fundamentals around safety and effective risk management haven't changed. They've just been changed in name. Like we'll put a new logo to it. We put a new name to it. We sell another book about it. We create some new standards about it. It's nothing new. And so it's not just been in practice, but in theory as well. I have yet to find a concept in safety that's new. I just haven't.
Michael Bowman, president at Bowman Legacies.
I want safety people to really see the power of their position. To lead from the middle can not only change someone's work life, but their home life as well. You have an opportunity to grow people in such a way with what you do that it can literally revolutionize their lives. I talk about legacy a lot, people, and I'm here to tell you right now, that is legacy. That is legacy, not money that you leave behind, not statues that were made in your honor. None of that means squat, because after the annals of history is over and you will be far forgotten, and the deeds that you do will be far forgotten, the intentions you put forward in life will perpetuate themselves for an eternity. And I'm here to tell you, the safety people are the true heroes of the industrial complex. And if you'll conceptualize and understand that and grab a hold of it and walk in it, you will see cultures change. You will see mindsets change. You will see what you thought was impossible move, because I know it, because I've lived it. It's not easy. It's the harder way. It's not about the box that gets checked. Okay. It's bigger than that. It's much bigger than that. And then when you lead in that way, I'm going to tell you, you're going to see your citations go down. You're going to see compliance go up, because you've got engaged, empowered people, and they're doing things because they're willing to march to hell with you and back, because they've watched you walk it, and it's inspired them to do the same.
This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Until next time, stay safe.